This video is sponsored by Micro Center. Micro Center is one of the best places to shop for all of your technology needs. Desktops, laptops, computer components, monitors, TVs, networking equipment, you name it. You'll find the best prices available whether you're looking online or in the stores for in-store pickup. I actually built my first PC at Micro Center and owe it a bit of a thanks for helping start this career. The Houston location was a bit of a home for me, and I actually would create a couple of my other builds at that same Micro Center as well. Micro Center even wants to offer new customers a free SSD. Just see the link in the description for more information. Also, make sure to check the pinned comment and the description for more information about Micro Center. Thanks for sponsoring this video, Micro Center. And back to the video, detectives. Battlefield, a 2-decade-year-old series spanning dozens of mainline and spin-off titles. A pillar in the world of online shooters, a favorite of mine and many others for high-flying, one-of-a-kind Battlefield moments which are perfect blends of crazy, novel, and/or exciting and all blended together experiences. While we have already covered a Battlefield title on the Death of a Game series, I didn't think we would so soon be returning, and with such a recent title. Battlefield 2042, developed by DICE and published by Electronic Arts, shedding the classic 32 vs 32 gameplay for the hardly touched 64 vs 64 person gameplay in an attempt to do things bigger than ever before for the franchise. Launched November 2021, and after a mere few months the population has dropped almost 97% to numbers lower than previous Battlefields even. Why are things going so badly for the Battlefield that was supposed to save the franchise? How is Battlefield 2042 in such a short time already badly faltering? In this episode of Death of a Game, we tackle another high-profile multiplayer shooter that failed to meet the colossal expectations set by an incredible marketing campaign and developer promises. Put away the class kits and pick up these new high-tech gadgets in your favorite specialist detectives, and let's gather enough clues and evidence to solve this case. Stick around for the very end where we put it all together for the final deduction, and at the very end of the video for a hint on what the next episode is going to be about. The story begins with the developers behind the franchise for a while now, DICE, a Swedish developer subsidiary to Electronic Arts, following the launch and subsequent aftermath of Battlefield 5. There are plenty of great Battlefield YouTubers out there like Nick930 and Jack Frags who have covered this game's rocky history with fans. And who knows, maybe someday we will as well. But Battlefield 5 was a bit of a black mark. Not that 4 didn't do them any favors either, but 4 would eventually be balanced and fixed to a more respectable state that fans would enjoy and often laud as one of the best games in the franchise history, unlike Battlefield 5. Following the failure of Battlefield 5 to meet EA expectations, there was a desire to right the wrongs and bring back Battlefield into the spotlight. That desire made DICE and EA reach high for what would be dubbed as Battlefield 6 until otherwise noted, which they would tease June 19th, 2020 during EA Play. Battlefield 6 was supposed to turn crazy, ambitious ideas into a reality according to EA, but they would release very little details concerning how, other than the fact that Battlefield 6 would be featured in a modern setting. August 17th, 2020, more information concerning DICE's next big Battlefield, Battlefield 6, would be leaked by a reputable leaker, Tom Henderson, who also managed to leak about Call of Duty in the past, as well as the fact that Battlefield 6 would indeed be in a modern setting. According to Tom, the maps in Battlefield 6 would be designed with 128 players in mind, which would signify a jump to 64 vs 64 players for the first time in the series officially, before the commenters get mad at me. Though according to Tom, the core game is still 32 vs 32. EA would also confirm and set the launch for Battlefield 6 for the calendar year of 2021. All of this in mind, there wasn't any true gameplay footage shown yet. With nothing to show for and big promises being made, fans were waiting to either be blown away or severely disappointed. In a now infamous press release, EA would claim Battlefield 6 by February of 2021 was way ahead of schedule and was set to release later that same year in the winter. EA CEO Andrew Wilson would also state that Battlefield 6 would support more players than ever before, with no details on how many that actually is or was. Meanwhile, EA CFO Blake Jorgensen would echo the sentiments, claiming that DICE was way ahead of where we were in prior product cycles. While Battlefield fans had been clamoring for an update from EA or DICE on the development of Battlefield 6, EA would eventually provide it. The updates in quotations were more of a, "we promise more updates coming soon." EA would announce that DICE Los Angeles, Criterion, and EA Gothenburg were assisting DICE on the project, making the Battlefield 6 team the biggest Battlefield team in development history. Now that's an interesting way to spin a project ahead of schedule needing so much help in development, right? But besides this and more of the same air quotes we have been given in April of 2021, Battlefield 6 was reaching a scary state of almost being vaporware at this point. No gameplay footage and no trailers to speak of the same year the game was set to launch. So the biggest team in Battlefield history might be needed. The big reveal for Battlefield 6 would finally come June 9th, 2021, now being dubbed Battlefield 2042. The reveal trailer was an absolute blockbuster, perfectly encapsulating many Battlefield moments at an impressive graphical fidelity, with map-wide destruction on full display and every explosion imaginable. Trailer or not, so far the marketing was really capturing the essence of Battlefield to players. A bombshell would be dropped in the midst of all of this news though, and that was Battlefield 2042 would be for the first time since Battlefield Bad Company lacking a campaign. This would make Battlefield 2042 a fully priced multiplayer-only game, but DICE would reassure fans that a campaign still technically existed and would take place in the multiplayer world updated over the course of seasons, and overall allow them to really lean into what we're best at. So no campaign for Battlefield 2042 would certainly be a knock for many fans of the franchise at this point, but at least there would reportedly be a narrative unfolding over time. Battlefield 2042 features the United States versus Russia in a humanitarian crisis brought by climate change. But it's not political. DICE was yet again asking for faith from the fans, as they were treating Battlefield 2042 like a love letter to the long-term fans of the series. Battlefield 2042 would have a gameplay trailer unveiled alongside the theatrical trailer, and the gameplay was impressive to say the least. The trailer seemed to yet again perfectly capture what it meant to play a Battlefield game. What limited pre-alpha footage, as it was dubbed, was showcased was visually seemingly a step above where previous projects had gone. In the trailers were also these catastrophic events seemingly caused by storms and weather in the game or the map itself, and definitely related to the climate migration creating warfare thing that DICE mentioned previously. But thematically, these don't really follow in the trailers. Sure, they're impressive at showcasing the gameplay engine and getting people excited about the visual impressiveness, but fans noticed the incongruence when they started accusing Battlefield 2042 of DICE and EA trying to push a climate refugee, climate migration narrative story, which was not very typical for the franchise thus far. Making a game about climate migration a serious subject affecting hundreds of thousands of people isn't inherently bad. I don't think that that's the problem here. Politics have been in video games since they started just about, and the Battlefield franchise is no stranger to politics clearly. But the Swedish developer coming out and rebuffing the accusations was just puzzling. It either makes you feel like they aren't committed enough to the story as it stood already, or it was just used to cause some headlines and impress people visually. Alongside the trailers and the giant info dump was a launch date set for October, which was only 4 months away. Open beta would be announced to take place sometime before launch, with a closed beta playtest happening in July. EA would have a technical test sometime in the summer. What EA would also reveal during that time would be the monetization model being used in Battlefield 2042 going forward. Battle Pass, a free and paid Battle Pass version, as typical in the industry now, and the whole season concept that sets the game up for a live service product, with each season supposedly adding more content and story to the game. This meant that very likely Battlefield 2042 as a multiplayer-only game could cost at launch in excess of $100 when you consider any season passes as well. To make matters worse, suspicions were already being raised over specialists and what they would entail as described in the press release, as this sounded like a departure from the iconic class system that Battlefield fans loved and most importantly were accustomed to, and a departure to cash in on some of the Apex and Call of Duty success. Facing heat from fans because they didn't have a campaign, DICE seemed to stress that they were going to build a multiplayer experience for single-player fans, which despite understanding what that means in the context of previous Battlefield titles even, and other campaign-based multiplayer games which exist as well, it was a bit puzzling because the experience in Battlefield single player was not the same experience you got online. And many would argue that that was a good thing. It was a change of pace, none more legendary of course than the Battlefield Bad Company series in Battlefield. That's a lot of Battlefield. Creating a more guided and scripted single-player experience was actually well received amongst Battlefield fans. Probably because they got enough sandbox gameplay in the multiplayer game, right? Maybe? DICE would offer AI in Battlefield 2042 as well to assist both teams in their conquests. This also, according to DICE, opened up the possibility of playing the game alone as a single-player experience. Which again, I just find disjointed personally. Because sure, you can do that, but why not just go online at that point? Why would someone play a subpar single-player experience online? I would argue that most would prefer a divorced single-player experience altogether to add some variety at the very least. It's also just much easier to set up the story that way. DICE's desire to try to appease both the multiplayer and single-player audiences, all the while building a multiplayer-only game, was a risky endeavor. Possible? Sure, but if the multiplayer experience is unsuccessful, you can't even sell the game in a value bin for the single player alone. Battlefield 2042's multiplayer was surely going to have to be impressive, and DICE was presenting 3 core modes: All-Out Warfare, aka basically Conquest mode, the most sandbox of the modes, equipped with multiple new weather effects and evolving world events, and vehicles capable of mass destruction as the franchise has been known for. Both teams battle in a tug-of-war style 64 versus 64 person multiplayer experience. When one team runs out of tickets, aka player lives, you lose the game. Capturing more than half the map also drastically reduces the ticket counts for the enemy team. The second mode was effectively Battlefield 2042's Battlefield 5 Firestorm, aka the Battle Royale extraction experience. This experience is more about squad-to-squad experiences, where you must try to loot up and grab the intel and make it to the extraction point before you're killed by an enemy team. You can outfit you and your team with dark market credits to obtain tactical upgrades, weapons, and equipment. Depending on which specialist you choose, you can provide different abilities and unique benefits to your team. Uplinks, aka laptops, are scattered throughout the map and are a way of getting the much needed upgrades in a way of vehicles and reinforcements. The final mode would remain a mystery, but there were hints that it would be targeting the classic Battlefield audience. DICE Los Angeles would be contributing the undisclosed mode, set to be revealed later in the month. DICE LA had a relatively good track record with the franchise, being the heroes of Battlefield 4, so it boded well for Battlefield fans. Allegedly, a closed beta took place July 2021, but I couldn't really find any details concerning it. What details were revealed to the public and drew almost unanimous celebration was the announcement of the third mode in Battlefield 2042, dubbed Portal Mode. Portal Mode is effectively a sandbox mode that allows you to play with custom tools and parameters, as well as leverage in-game assets from Battlefield 2042, 1942, Bad Company 2, and Battlefield 3. That means that you can not only play any of those versions of the game on the Portal mode, you could mix and match parts of the game together for wacky results. It was a Battlefield playground, essentially, on a cross-platform experience. With DICE LA, now dubbed Ripple Effect Studios, leading the charge on Portal mode, fans were feeling like they could at least mostly rest easy on that, knowing that even if Battlefield 2042 itself wasn't a good experience, at least they had the classic Battlefield experiences to participate in. Battlefield 2042 coming not much as a surprise to anyone at this point, with very little footage available and people able to test the game yet, would be delayed to November 19th, 2021. DICE would cite the global pandemic that took place, creating unforeseen challenges which led to the delay. The worrying part about this is that earlier in the year they had reported to be way ahead of schedule, so now fans were conflicted on if that was even accurate to begin with. Battlefield 2042 would finally become playable to the public in an open beta October 6, 2021, and impressions were actually rather mixed concerning the game. While outlets like PC Gamer were fairly positive, stating that Battlefield is back to what it does best, Deduction urged Battlefield 2042 to just delay again, highlighting the performance issues the game was suffering from, plaguing even high-end PCs. The maps were also gigantic, forcing you to traverse on vehicles and making things like spotting an enemy exceedingly difficult. Some players were in the worst case scenario not even getting the chance to play the game as they were getting stuck on an infinite load loop. Besides the copious amounts of bugs and performance issues, some game breaking and others just a nuisance, there were a slew of other issues being mentioned here too. Even things like HUD issues making it hard to spot your team and the enemy players alike. Even if you were having fun in the limited Battlefield 2042 beta, you're bound to feel bored after only being able to experience one map and 4 specialists. So Battlefield 2042's time on the front stage wasn't working out terribly well so far. They did not make a good first impression. DICE would suggest that the beta build was a couple of months old in an attempt to reassure players that many of the issues they were suffering from would be ironed out. But according to leaker Tom Henderson, it was claimed that the build players experienced in October was just finished September 20th, the previous month. This would prove to be yet another devastating blow to the confidence and trust in the Battlefield audience concerning DICE and the possible success of Battlefield 2042. Because that meant that DICE had to fix these plethora of issues outlined, and not even fully outlined yet, honestly, in the span of basically a month. DICE was aware of the largest issues and was determined to iron them out before launch, such as the specialists, the UI, and the complete lack of in-game communication. On October 21st, 2021, DICE would announce 5 new specialists to combat the issues players had in the beta of limited specialists and the balance issues of such. Let's start with the specialists though, which I have been kind of conveniently avoiding breaking down thus far. They replaced the tried and true class system in Battlefield. Players weren't just complaining about there not being enough specialists, they were complaining about the specialist system being included, period. The specialist system had effectively taken over the class system in Battlefield, and it wasn't a change that players asked for. DICE's total not addressing of this too was rubbing some fans, like myself, the wrong way. The largest issues with the specialist system implemented thus far in Battlefield 2042 were they impacted some of the uniquely iconic Battlefield playstyles. For example, now theoretically, everyone at the very least could squad revive, greatly nerfing and reducing the effectiveness of the medic. Since weapons aren't locked behind a specific class, theoretically nothing can stop you from getting an LMG as an engineer, or a sniper as a medic. But other issues such as identification were quite poor because of the lack of the class identity. As in previous Battlefield versions, utilizing the class system, you could clearly see who was what. Now in Battlefield 2042, it was a mystery with a specialist system, and you were bound to see so many of the exact same operators repeated, no longer making them unique looking or unique period. Battlefield players just wanted to play as generic soldiers again. As hilarious as that sounds, yes, players expected to play as just soldiers in a war-based game called Battlefield. On top of that, soldiers in a war aren't specialized to the umpteenth level with special gadgets either, right? Not all of them. So it almost feels like the gadgets are just thrown in to make the specialists feel more appealing. But DICE, instead of taking beta as an opportunity to revert the class system, had stuck to their guns regarding the specialist system. And there's theoretically many reasons possible for why. Largest being that they believed in the design, right? Or they believed in the design. Skins would be much easier to sell on specialists than for entire classes, and would bring the Battlefield franchise in alignment with other competitors such as Rainbow Six Siege and their operators, and COD Warzone and its. So it's hard not to see the decision for DICE to go against the fans' wishes to remove specialists as being, well, primarily profit-driven. But if you build a system your own fan base doesn't want to play, that's also not really good business either, guys. There's also a whole lot of things said about the performance, including this is an older build, so things are worse and will be better in the future, which again, the leakers seem to contradict, but the gist was that they would iron out the issues going forward for the actual launch of the game. There's a whole lot of other positive things said and added or changed that are mentioned in the official update, but something about the whole thing just feels way too self-congratulatory to me. Like, guys, the game is not even a month before launch, and you guys want a pat on the back for adding in normal UI elements from previous Battlefield titles? Or industry standard type stuff? Although the communication was better than none, I still at the time have my suspicions as I didn't choose to purchase Battlefield 2042 despite beta testing it. How could DICE and the 100th other studios assisting them fix the plethora of core gameplay and performance issues in just under a month? Well, realistically, they couldn't, which is why some outlets and fans were asking for yet another delay. Throughout the issues and overall scuffedness for even a Battlefield launching, Battlefield 2042's early access launch would go live November 12th, 2021 on all platforms. During this early access period, some video game outlets such as IGN and GameSpot would release their game reviews. IGN would state that Battlefield 2042's high point was Ripple Effect Studios' classic sandbox mode, and that Battlefield 2042 tries to do too much, but besides decrying some of the performance issues, they were rather positive concerning the game, giving it a 7 out of 10, seemingly off of the Portal mode alone. GameSpot's score was rather similar, and on the Fence review that kind of says a lot of negative text or meh undertones, yet only scored the game a 7 out of 10. This could be the problem with review scores just in general, advertising budgets and making journalists or outlets want to inflate numbers, or the game is just meh and people are scoring that as a 7 out of 10, which just again shows the problem with rating things out of 10 in gaming. Because a game that's a 7 out of 10 is actually a good game. It might seem like I'm being needlessly negative about the critical reviews given to Battlefield 2042 even before their official launch, but it's because I find the scrutiny used in each of them to be rather kid-gloved, and thus that it makes me feel that the review scores are more worthless than usual. I think it will also start to make more sense once you see how the audience's reception to Battlefield 2042 contrasts so heavily with the critical reception, probably the most we have seen on a video game ever. Battlefield 2042 would officially launch November 19th, 2021. And as promised, the player reception was a stark contrast to the critical reception. On aggregate review website Metacritic, Battlefield 2042 would score a 68 from 74 different critics. Meanwhile, score the worst rating for the entire series and arguably a major shooter franchise period, a 2.1 from over 4,500 users. Now, if you're a good detective, you might be thinking that's not enough people to form a dataset. Well, check the Steam reviews, where Battlefield 2042 scored a 28% from 101,000 plus player reviews. It was one thing for a Battlefield launch to falter and stumble, as was near tradition at this point, but Battlefield 2042 wasn't just stumbling, it was tumbling. Okay, please, Tom, cut that, please. But it was horrifying longtime fans of the franchise. Battlefield's launch on all platforms and review websites were marred by a slew of negative player reviews. So why were fans of the franchise so pissed off? Well, for starters, let's consult this very long and incredibly detailed list that contains everything downgraded from the Battlefield franchise and Battlefield 2042, or that was straight removed. No standard server browser or persistent lobbies, meaning that you had to enter matchmaking constantly to get placed into a match. If you managed to get into a match and weren't plagued with a connection error that either disconnected you mid-joining or made sure to kick you out at some point of your re-matchmaking process, you would be greeted with the same performance issues and plethora of bugs that were in beta. With the jump to 64 players on each team, performance issues were clearly suffering because of such, with even high-end PCs with fast internet suffering from latency issues, hit registration, and even rubber banding. Some Battlefield vets even suggested joining less populated servers, so they would be at least able to play against the AI with less lag and less issues. Not being able to play a game, for starters, is a pretty huge bug. Some would call it game breaking, right? Which is what basically happened when you got stuck in an endless down glitch, where you couldn't resurrect or be resurrected anymore. Whether you got your head stuck in an object, or you just had some random bug where you had to leave the match. But there's more than just that. There's visual bugs, happening randomly, such as flashing lights in the menus and map screens, parachutes just randomly appearing or just being there randomly, gunfire appearing from nowhere, even soldiers just apparating from out of nowhere. If you managed to even play the game, you wielded quite possibly one of the weakest arsenals in Battlefield history. Even with portal guns counted, Battlefield 4 still had more guns at launch. There were only 22 primary guns, 3 sidearms, and 2 launchers in Battlefield 2042, and in total, only 4 assault rifles. On top of less variety of your arsenal, many guns also simply felt weaker than in previous iterations. Some time to kills required juggernaut levels of bullets to take a target down, which just makes the game balance feel poor. Battlefield 2042 featured less movement options in combat than before too, such as high wall vaulting, backwards proning, no diving while swimming, or manual leaning. And tracking measures such as just a regular scoreboard, battle log stats, global leaderboards were missing or poorly implemented. The scoring system no longer would award player damage points, squad wipes, vehicle damage points, headshot bonuses, comeback and multi-kill bonuses, and too many to count honestly. And if you were trying to coordinate with your team in the all-out warfare or conquest style mode, now featured in the highly hyped 64 versus 64 person gameplay, you had one of the worst squad experiences in a Battlefield game. With no squad management like simply creating a new one or just switching, no commander, and no special call-ins or field upgrades. On top of that, you had no cross-team chat, no ability to change teams, no clans, and no platoons. It was one thing to have some of these things missing because of a design decision, but when many industry and franchise standards are now missing, or just so poorly implemented, the fan base is gonna feel that and notice it, especially when they're already paying full price for a multiplayer-only game. The second mode added to Battlefield 2042 was Hazard Mode, which was effectively a mini escape from Tarkov or Battle Royale with an emphasis on getting out as an example. The problem with Hazard Mode was it just felt half-baked really. It needed more time in the oven. For starters, the guns and such were locked behind the standard game progression, and second off, there were many rumors and ideas that the Hazard Mode portion was originally supposed to be free to play, which would have opened up Battlefield 2042 to a bigger audience and let it compete with Halo Infinite and Valorant, which are free to play mega shooters. When Battle Royale FPS shooter star Shroud decries your game, it's not a good sign. But it was more than just Shroud saying this about Hazard Mode, it was the Battlefield audience at large saying it. Hazard Mode didn't really have a purpose. It was just a non-consequential mode without any real permanence or transference to the other parts of Battlefield 2042. The performance issue plaguing the game's jump to 128 players were still there, leading to more performance issues for even those with powerful PCs. So much so that DICE had to patch the game for November 23, 2021, as well as tackle the aforementioned squad and general revive issues, as well as vehicle balancing. Yep, even the vehicles in Battlefield 2042 felt both overtuned and far less of an arsenal than before, which changes wouldn't really fix the latter, but the former is also a huge problem. All of these changes were much needed and came only a few days after the launch of the game. That for some people feels like a positive thing, because hey, at least they're updating the game very quickly, which sadly has to be lauded, especially in a game as a service. But the problem is, such rapid-fire updates make me question how much of these issues are just leftover from before, from beta, and they're just finally now getting enough time to fix them. Maybe that's just the pessimist in me, if they didn't launch the game with so many of the same issues, but overall it was a good Part 1 patch with the following part to come a few days later. The second part of the update focused more on the gun side of things, including much needed balancing. The third update for Battlefield 2042, in an attempt to patch more of the numerous bugs and gameplay issues, would issue 150 plus bug and gameplay fixes, as well as some more UI improvements, December 1st, 2021. And in order to answer the demand by fans for a faster-paced game mode, whether because the 64 versus 64 player stuff just didn't function properly due to performance issues, or that they just simply missed more of the standard modes like Team Deathmatch, Hardcore, and Rush. Rush is exactly what DICE would add in the third update as well, which according to fans was positively well received. More HUD, UI, and matchmaking changes were also featured in the update. These updates again were much needed in the game, but it still felt like not enough. And at the same time it seemed to spotlight the fact that the game was unfinished. Battlefield fans' displeasure was quite apparent, and reflected in the 63% drop in population Battlefield 2042 suffered on Steam. Dropping from 100,000 peak players to 47,367 players, these drops in players were significant, even if you consider that these don't account for all of the Battlefield 2042's population numbers, and the fact that the game still sold millions of copies at this point. December 2nd, though, a day later, former Battlefield franchise head Oscar Gabrielson would announce his leaving of Electronic Arts. EA would now position Respawn Entertainment and Ripple Effects studio head, aka DICE LA, Vince Zampella, in charge, an exec with no previous Battlefield experience, but instead mostly Call of Duty experience. Additionally announced was a Battlefield-connected universe now in development, resulting in collaboration between DICE, Ripple Effect, and a new Seattle-based team led by former Halo creator Marcus Lehto. They would urge that the support for Battlefield 2042 would persist as well, but it's hard for that to not seem like an absolute footnote in the announcement, which is understandable with the Portal mode since it was the most positively well-received part of Battlefield 2042, but it could also speak to their desire to pivot off of the project. In relatively bad timing for Battlefield 2042, successful leaker Tom Henderson would release a YouTube video concerning the troubled development of the game, detailing many of the game's issues. For example, EA reportedly had asked DICE to copy what's popular, which is what led to the things like hazard mode being included, as well as the specialist system. Of course, as well as the potential to monetize both of these. But Tom would also show that much of Battlefield's team was gutted before the development even began. 19 senior DICE developers to be exact, and a few original founders even, would leave the company. Reason cited, creative freedom. Respawn Entertainment, who at the time with their massive out-of-nowhere success of Apex Legends, a battle royale, was EA's money-making darling. Respawn detailed that EA wanted to charge full price for their shooter as well, but they had to put their foot down. This, alongside their commitment to doing the game their own way without EA meddling in affairs, was reportedly how they were able to be successful with Apex Legends, and why Tom Henderson believes Battlefield development should have been handled similarly. Now it seemed like Vince and the team at Respawn were looking to do that again with the Battlefield franchise. I really recommend checking out that video from Tom Henderson because it covers most of the pre-launch aspects of Battlefield 2042's development concerning the timeline and how during each of these events Tom is receiving it, essentially contradicting developer testimonies anonymously. And that midway through Battlefield 2042's development, it shifted from being a battle royale to a more typical Battlefield experience, with a few interesting twists, such as the world events, storm effects, and the fact that it was 64 versus 64 players. This could explain why these things don't really lead to the levolution of maps, which was missed from previous Battlefield versions, and seems more like a visual effect for marketing than anything. The 3.1 update would hit, showing clearly by even name or number that the updates coming for Battlefield from this point on would be fewer and further in between, or that it was the holidays and the developers were taking a break. Update 3.1 would fix more of the hit registration issues allegedly, as well as more ground vehicle fixes. They also finally, a month after launch, fixed some of the directional sound issues the game was suffering from. EA Global Director of Integrated Comms, holy crap what a long title, Andy McNamara, would come out on Twitter January 5th following the break and lull in updates for Battlefield 2042, annoyed at players expecting more updates and communication over the holidays. Things got so bad that the Battlefield 2042 subreddit even threatened to shut down due to toxicity concerning the game and the recent communications. I kinda question the legality or at least the morality of such a thing, but being toxic in itself doesn't necessarily solve any problems either. But fans were genuinely angry, and had legitimate reasons to be. We haven't even fully covered yet for reference. So while taking a break for holidays is perfectly reasonable, when your game by January is already down to 17,448 peak players, 60% down from the previous number, according to Steam, players are going to feel like you don't have enough urgency, especially when they aren't satisfied with the product. If anything, their toxicity shows they still give a shit about the game and playing it, which is needed regardless of how many copies Battlefield 2042 sold, which weren't as impressive as the previous Battlefields anyway. Because the game was a live service game, it couldn't rely on just copies sold anyway. When toxicity and fan letdown subsides and becomes a deafening quiet, the population is going to be at all-time lows. Update 3.2 came January 20th, 10 days later, tackling, you guessed it, more bugs and hit registration issues. Oh, and sprinkle in more infinite downstate and rubber banding issues that I thought were fixed like 2 updates ago, by the way. DICE or Ripple Effect Studios or whoever was in charge at this point was going to need to either go into overdrive and attempt to save the now further faltering game, or do something just as crazy and risky too. Bide their time to release a bunch of significant updates at once, versus the trickle effect. This theoretically could allow them to do bigger content injections, or bug fixes at a grand scale, or more importantly fix some of the core issues Battlefield 2042 had been suffering from, which they keep saying they're fixing and they're not. Battlefield 2042 didn't just suffer from visual, performance, server, and gameplay balancing issues. Nope, it suffered from core game design problems. These issues were the real killer of Battlefield because bug fixes unfortunately weren't going to make the game fun, with these reasons still persisting. The shift to 64 versus 64 players is actually a bigger problem than we might realize due to how the problem it creates compact on the rest of the game. It's not just performance issues that plague the 128-person map. It's straight map design issues. If you're not in a vehicle due to the wide open nature of the maps, Battlefield 2042 felt more like a total running simulator, more than usual. This isn't just because maps are big, it's because the maps are big with a whole lot of nothing in between. Instead, DICE opted to build these giant multiplayer maps like a collection of smaller maps, which literally sounds like the design of COD Warzone, by the way. Which doesn't work in a massive multiplayer shooter like Battlefield 2042, because those engagements work in COD and Warzone because of the time to kill and the type of game, featuring mostly small player, tight space engagements. Instead, here you have large swaths of infantry players getting picked off while running to the next piece of cover in the distance with no fun or interesting way to solve this other than hopping in a vehicle. Partly due to the natural sway of a real battlefield, no pun intended, but other parts due to the removed features such as fortifications, greatly nerfing infantry gameplay. Let's take this screenshot of the orbital map for example. Just notice how so much of the map sectors are just empty land. This makes the infantry just get shafted really hard, and although that makes logical sense in a military situation, this is a video game, and you can control the parameters by controlling the map design. Battlefield has had traditionally good mixtures of infantry and vehicle gameplay. Let's compare this map to the Caspian border map in Battlefield 4, which has clear choke points and an overall inability to just run around a giant open map without any form of control or contact. I mean, hell, Battlefield 2042 did Caspian border, and as you can see in the screenshot, it just looks terrible with the new map system, losing so much of the detail. In describing one issue, the maps and their design, I found yet another issue. The map itself. That's kind of remarkable. The map and map design issues with Battlefield's worst squad system to date and no communication options, and you have the jump to 64 versus 64 gameplay, feeling completely nameless, lonely, and feeling more like a loss of identity from previous iterations. These are some huge core design mistakes that a few content patches and some bug fixes simply just can't fix, which is why I'm featuring Battlefield 2042 on this series, despite it not being technically dead yet. Even if you can get past all of the litany of issues with Battlefield 2042, the core game just wasn't that fun. Coming as a critical blow to the morale of those few Battlefield players left, or those who already stopped playing but were looking for a reason to come back, Battlefield 2042's Season 1 update would be delayed to summer, announced February 1st, 2021. DICE would announce that the season delay would be due to needing to focus on improving the Battlefield experience, and promising upon the return in the summer to bring voice communication, player profiles for stats, a tighter squad loop, whatever the fuck that is, and a refined ping system, gunplay improvements, and some expanded tool modes and tweaks to the Battlefield portal. If you just skim the Reddit thread, you can tell the Battlefield fanbase was just fed up. It wasn't just Battlefield 2042 causing this damage. As you can even read in the comments, it came from DICE's failure with Battlefield 5 actually. That set the fanbase up for even more disappointment. With Battlefield 5 also as a live service Battlefield, they abandoned support when the game just didn't work out for them anymore to go work on Battlefield 2042. The problem with games as a service, and boy there are many, like nickel and diming your customers with a full price game, skins and season passes for new content, is that once your population falters past a point, it's incredibly difficult to bring players back because you can't by design support a live service game meant to constantly make more money with no players left. The saddest thing about this is that even though Battlefield 5 has no updates coming to it and has issues of its own, as I'm writing this sometime in April of 2022, Battlefield 5 has 6 times Battlefield 2042's population according to Steam charts. In fact, Battlefield 2042's population stats are more comparable to Battlefield 4. Yes, the standalone version on Steam that was still pulling 3,400 peak players. As of February 2022, Battlefield 2042 had 5,610 peak players. Meanwhile, players amassed 200,000 signatures concerning Battlefield 2042 and wanting a refund. That's a considerable amount of angry Battlefield fans. It was as the Washington Post put it though, EA and DICE paying for their incredibly large mistake of pushing the game to a launch date when it just clearly was not ready for such, when they've already done that so many times, seemingly just exhausting the goodwill of the Battlefield fans. And not only ruined the game's first impressions on the big stage, it soured fans with how it was handled, further tarnishing the franchise's reputation. DICE and EA wasn't just going to have to worry about fans not wanting to play the current Battlefield game, like the COD franchise can suffer from time to time. It was going to have to worry about getting an audience, period. By March, the population on Steam had plummeted to 3,241 players peak, and 1,900 players average, which had now become lower than Battlefield 4 standalone, a 9-year-old game. You know it's bad when your game has sold millions and can't even beat a Battlefield 2 versions behind. I mean that in more ways than just the population numbers too. Battlefield 2042 is supposed to be an upgrade to previous games, at least in some sort of way, right? Graphics, gameplay, doing things bigger and better, etc. But graphics, something that I haven't discussed yet, were actually lacking in Battlefield 2042 as well. Not only did the art style itself feel quite dull and plasticky, especially when compared to Battlefield 2142, which manages to look more, I think, futuristic and cool. Part of it feels like with Battlefield 2042, DICE was just like, okay, let's do a modern shooter, but let's make it kind of gray and silver and metallic colored because it's slightly in the future, as if that would somehow convey the message or the theme. Instead, you have a fairly lifeless graphical expression in Battlefield 2042, where with things like gun model detail, it gets its ass kicked by Battlefield 5. Hell, even Battlefield 4 manages to come away looking and sounding superior in some ways to Battlefield 2042, with a far more crisp sound design and better destructible environments. While we're comparing old Battlefields, let's compare even Battlefield 1. You can still see, without even looking terribly closely, more detailed textures and more comprehensive destructible environments. There's a real reason for this. It's not something that you can just hand-wave as being a fanboy or personal preference. As described in the video, a presentation at GDC concerning DICE and the art of something called photogrammetry. Photogrammetry in layman's terms is the idea of taking photos of an object and stitching them together to create 3D objects. Photogrammetry, when used in a video game, is more complex, but it allows for essentially 3D modeling of objects at record speeds since you don't need the same amount of labor to do such. The downside of using photogrammetry is it costs more upfront due to the hardware needed, and as far as I understand it, that's just the main downside. DICE didn't elect to use photogrammetry in Battlefield 2042, and the difference is both seen and felt. Battlefield 2042 is already aging worse than the previous iterations of the game, which is also why it started to get eclipsed by them, and population probably. With no major updates promised until the summer, Battlefield 2042 would instead open up communication lines with the player base concerning the larger issues the game would suffer from. The news release from DICE discusses some of the issues in the game at a core level, such as time and difficulty traversing the map, and the intensity of combat gameplay in some of the zones. The update or discussion is quite positive, with DICE admitting that they needed to solve some of the sightlines and lack of cover issues on maps. They would also outline some of these specific examples on the Kaleidoscope map, such as the left tower near the skate park being quite abandoned due to it being so hard to navigate terrain on foot. It's simply too easy to just get picked off. DICE was targeting Season 1 to update these changes into the map, so players at the very least would be forced to wait another few months before even just one map got some of these much needed changes. DICE was transparent about that though, which I'm actually quite happy about, because being honest and realistic in this scenario is far more helpful than not. But them also admitting that it would take them at best half a year to get the game in a functioning state is just sad. That makes the game feel like it was an entire year launched early, which it unfortunately plays like. Tom Henderson would return with yet more tea to spill on Battlefield 2042 March 23, 2021. This time concerning the future of the game, and news about another Battlefield game already entering pre-production phase. It was like Battlefield 5 all over again. Apparently DICE had learned from the failures of Battlefield 2042, a game they dubbed internally a miss, and would potentially implement changes promised. Or just repeat the process again with a new project, right? Maybe. The Battlefield fanbase was calling Battlefield 2042 a nail in the coffin for the franchise, so things weren't looking good. The next big update is supposed to come sometime in April of 2022, and would feature hundreds of changes mostly targeting more bug fixes, vehicle balancing, and the aforementioned scoreboard and voice chat. For any game to not have these features would be bad, especially in 2022, the age of modern shooters, but for Battlefield to not have it, which has had these things before, there just wasn't an excuse. And fans were just fed up with it. We've managed to make it to the end of our timeline and catch everything up to the current time of things in April of 2022. Battlefield is still awaiting the supposed update coming, but I have little faith it will do much in the big scheme of things. With Season 1 delayed and the population at an all-time low, there's very little chance that even if Season 1 does go off, it will be successful enough to revitalize the title in the way it truly needs. Or at least I have very little faith it will get to that point. Still, Battlefield 5 did eventually become a playable game, but it had one expansion in the same time that Battlefield 2042 has had 0, and Battlefield 4 in that same time had 12. Oh man. So maybe I will be proven wrong and have to eat crow in the coming months. Feel free to remind me if so. But I think I've obtained enough evidence and clues at this point to put the case to bed, even if the victim is still living, but in critical condition. That means that everyone's favorite part of the video, including mine, is up next. The final deduction. Hit the music, Tom. Utterly incomplete, lacking polish, and rushed for a AAA Battlefield project. Lacking core Battlefield features and staples. The Battlefield gameplay experience is truly lacking. The game suffers from difficult-to-fix core gameplay issues, such as map cover and infantry movement and gameplay. There have been 0 content updates for Battlefield 2042 thus far. The Specialist system killed the beloved class system, violated and took advantage of the goodwill of the fanbase. The game suffers from immense technical issues, such as buggy gameplay, rubber banding, and general server lag. Battlefield 2042 was a chore to play, and frankly a chore to cover. While it's nothing against Battlefield fans or my detectives who enjoy my videos, of course, it's just I have a sour taste in my mouth after this video, probably like many of you do. Battlefield 5 was already a mark on DICE and EA's record, even if it was eventually hobbled to a playable and enjoyable experience. But Battlefield 2042, in comparison, just felt like a straight insult, because it was even worse than Battlefield 5's situation, on top of also just being deja vu. With yet another unannounced Battlefield project, you would think we would feel optimistic or at least grateful. I mean, shit, imagine being an F-Zero fan. But unless that game is really promised to be made by Ripple Effect Studios and EA or DICE aren't going to micromanage, which would require pulling a Respawn Entertainment, not many Battlefield fans will be optimistic. And how many will be even willing to buy from the franchise anymore? It feels like DICE and EA need to go back to the drawing board with Battlefield as a whole franchise and try and remember what captured people's hearts and trigger fingers for so many years. Some might say it's too little too late. And maybe for some Battlefield fans it is. But I really think if the Battlefield franchise is humble and takes a Japanese developer approach in obtaining feedback and re-steering the franchise back on track, it might have a chance. They have to start with admitting that they screwed up though. And yeah, good luck with that. I'm not holding my breath at this point. I'm kind of running out of it as I'm doing this incredibly long video that I hope you guys enjoyed, by the way. And if Battlefield doesn't do well enough as a franchise from this point on though, it's not crazy to think that EA could be yet another reaper of a legendary franchise. I mean, they already claimed the Medal of Honor series, which many of the same devs involved in Battlefield also worked on. I hope that fate isn't shared with Battlefield, as it would make yet another favorite series of mine to face the Reaper. Thanks for watching, detectives.
Let this city bear witness to your power.